and busy world around here. And I hope that you're staying close to the Lord, time in the Bible, time in prayer, time in church, and time trying to be a help and service of others. And our family's been busy. We got out of that last week, a week of sick, and now there's just running and catch up and things going on. We got a bunch of our young people at a youth conference in Arizona today and tomorrow, and then back Sunday night or Saturday night, and then of course being in church all day Sunday, and busy, lots to do. And I'm just thinking about the church. And we this month we're talking about stewardship of our time, talent, and treasure. Started out with missions, a missions conference, because we can't let our church have the basis of our planning and thinking be on us. We want to be on others. And so we start the year out, first thing, we have our missions conference, and we get our focus right on missions. The big thing is others. And the Great Commission, go into all the world and preach the gospel. That's not here, that's everywhere. And so we start out with that missions conference. And then in order to do a good job with missions, we have to be able to finance missionaries and help them. And there's so many needs for our missionaries around the world, physical needs and physical, family, financial, for their personal needs, and then structural, buildings and vehicles, so many needs in these other countries. And there's the government intervention, paperwork, and there's nothing we can do, but we could pray and pray that God would help this paperwork get through for our missionaries. And several of our missionaries, it's every other year thing. They fight every year. Some they get more long-term paperwork, but pray for our missionaries. And you get that. I'm looking for my book. It's in my drawer here, I guess. But if you haven't picked up one of these books, pick one up if you're from our church, and pray for these missionaries. These people matter. They have been willing to step out and say, "I'll go. Here am I. Send me." But it's our job to help it work, and it'd be very hard to do it on their own. And so that's our job now. But in regard to where we are, the greatest work in the world is the church. Besides your salvation and your personal walk with God, there is nothing on the planet any more valuable than a good church. You say, well, family's important. Yeah, but you know what? If you don't have a good church, your family's going to struggle. You can take your good family and put them somewhere in a compromising church, and your good family's not going to do very well. Our families need a good church, and a good family is not going to win the lost around the world. I think God instituted in Genesis, He instituted the family, and then in Genesis 6 He instituted government. And then, of course, later He instituted the church. Those are the three institutions God set up: the family, the government, and the church. But without a good church, the government is going to become so corrupt. And the church and believers ought to put a spiritual harness on the government. And you might say, well, the Constitution, you know what? Our governmental leaders the last years have violated our Constitution so many times. Well, I'll tell you what, our churches have violated their Constitution. And our churches have loved sports more than ministry, and they've loved leisure more than church. And so we got the government we deserve. But we need a church. And I want to take just a minute or two in this first page in the book of 1 Timothy. In our adult Sunday school classes, we're going through the missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul. And so he ends up in northern Greece in a place called Macedonia, and then southern Greece where Corinth and Athens is, and all those things are in the Bible. And but Paul would travel to different places with usually a small group of people. Luke wrote the book of Acts, so he was with him, and then we know Timothy and Titus, and he sent this person there and this person there. So there's multiple people: Paul and Silas, Paul and Barnabas, Paul and John Mark, different people. There were different ones along the way. So Paul, he got things going up here in Macedonia, and he said, and that would be northern Greece. And he said, "Now, Timothy, I'm going to leave you here. I want you to get this thing together." And I wanted to show you especially, maybe the Lord, you're gonna have to move, and you're gonna have to find a church, or maybe you already have moved and you're struggling to find a church. I want you to see a couple things. So first of all, this is the base things, the base things of a good church. If you want a good, solid church, what do you need? All right. So first of all, if you look at 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 2, as I was sought thee still, to abide still at Ephesus. So they were there and they were leaving. He said, no, you abide still. When I went to Macedonia, that thou mightest charge some that they teach no other doctrine. So Paul has left Timothy in Ephesus. He's going over to northern Greece. Macedonia. He's going to southern Greece, to Corinth, and those are his travels he's in. And he says in verse 3 that you charge some that they teach no other doctrine, neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies. So number one thing, if you want a good church, you have to have somebody who's in charge of who teaches and what they teach. Somebody has got to be in control of the teaching in the church. In a church like ours, I don't even know how many teachers we have. I know we probably got eight or 10 people who do teaching, preaching in Spanish. And we've got 8 or 9 adult Sunday school classes. And so those are all men or ladies who are teaching an adult class. And then we've got people who preach at the rest home, people who preach in the jail. And then we've got our children's preachers and teachers. And so there's a lot of people taking the word of God. The pastor's job, the first thing the church needs is somebody to say, no, you're not teaching. Until you get over that liquor problem or that drug problem, or until you get over that anger problem or whatever it is, you're not teaching. You're not going to be put in a position in our church. Somebody's got to carry the hammer and say, no, we can't do it. And then what they teach, that they don't give heed to endless fables and endless genealogies. And so here again, we see somebody locking this thing down. So number one thing in a good church, you got to have somebody in leadership. And you need a guy who is willing to say who can teach and what they can teach. That's how it all gets started. So you go a little bit further along in here, and in chapter 2, I exhort therefore, because of these things, he's kind of opening up this book of Timothy on how to keep the church. Really kind of a theme is over in chapter 3, that thou mayest know how thou ought to behave thyself in the church of God, chapter 3, verse 15. And so he said, this is how to behave in the church. And so I want to set this thing up, Timothy. I want you to put this thing. In fact, over in Titus, if you go just 2 or 3 pages over, Titus chapter 1, the same thing. Paul leaves Titus on the island of Crete, and he says in verse 5, for this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city, as I appointed thee. So Paul said, Titus, I need you to set these things in order. In a church, you just can't have a whole bunch of random people all doing whatever they want to do. Any more than street basketball. A bunch of guys at the park, somebody's got to organize that thing. If I go down to the park, I used to do this years ago and play with a bunch of guys out in the world. Somebody's got to decide who's going to bring the ball down the court, and who's going to kind of be, somebody's going to be in charge on that. Somebody on that basketball court is going to be in charge of each team. You're going to find a leader, and that leader their job is to make order. I don't care if it's a little league team, little kids, or if it's a professional baseball, basketball, football team, whatever it might be. There's a coach, and his job is to make order out of all this talent. And his job is to put this guy in this position and this person in that position, and make sure that each person's in their place. They know their job. We're going to have an orderly practice. We're going to have orderly travel to our games. We're going to have orderly offense and defense. And so Paul said that same thing in a church. Paul said, Titus, I want you to set in order things that are wanting. You got to create some order on that island of Crete. And then secondly, ordain elders. Now, some people put the elders as the orderly, which I'm fine with that too. But you know what, Titus, you can't leave without each of those churches having somebody in charge. You need a pastor in each one of those churches. And then you need order in the church. So going back over to Timothy, if you want a great church, number one, you need to have a leader. You need to have a leader, and I know we're in a culture that doesn't like leadership, and they don't. Everybody wants to be able to do their own thing, especially in church. People who never have led anything, they think they know how to run a church, but no, there's one person. It's a pastor, and it's a male, and very clearly in Timothy and Titus he talks about that. And so here's this man who's supposed to set in order. He says, I want you to ordain elders in every city. And then here in Timothy, he said, you decide who can teach and what they teach, and I want you to make sure this stuff's all in order. And so after he establishes the pastor, and then his job is to who can teach and what they can teach, then look over to chapter 2 and verse 1. You see, I exhort, therefore, that first of all, and for 8 verses, he says, teach the men to pray. I don't know anything more needy in our churches than teaching our men to pray. We've just, I think there's probably some ladies who pray, but there's not many men who pray. And Paul said, once you get a leader who will care for and direct who teaches and what they teach, you got to keep not just the who, it's the person, a man of character, a man of example, or a lady, but then you also control what they teach. That's the leader's job. The very next thing, teach men to pray. We need prayer. Our president needs prayer. Oh, don't you think the devil is after our president? And he is pro-Israel. He's pro-religion. We came out of Obama, whatever number of years ago, 8 years ago or whatever, and they had a holiday tree, not a Christmas tree. It was almost like you couldn't say Merry Christmas. President Trump's first election, immediately you started hearing Merry Christmas in stores. He's not the guy you're going to have be your pastor or your Bible teacher in your men's Bible study or whatever. But as a president, he is lifted up. Read it, religion and freedom of religion. He is also lifted up. Take care of the American people, and let's protect our cities. I tell you, the devil hates him. I can tell you that much. So, men of prayer, because he says right there that you pray for kings and all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. That's in 1 Timothy 2:2. So you got to teach men to pray. If you want a great church, what do you need? You need a man in the pulpit who'll say who can teach and what they teach. And then you need men to learn to pray. And the third thing that we need to get is in 1 Timothy 2, verses 9 and following. We need to teach the ladies to be modest. It's just simple as that. Teach the ladies to be modest. The inauguration, there's so many different things going on in the inauguration. I couldn't even tell you who it was, but there were all these beautifully dressed, fancy people and stuff. And this one lovely lady comes walking out, and she had a long formal, but her dress was slit all the way up to the upper thigh. And I can guarantee you this: nobody even knows who that is. Nobody could tell you if she blacked out half her teeth, if she had half her head shaved. You know what they saw? They saw that leg stick. They saw that revealed leg sticking out there. That was a statement of look at my legs. And that's not what a good, and again, I'm not picking on her. That's what the world does. That's not how a Christian should be, though. You don't need girls walking around the church like that. I was at a wedding out of the area, and rarely go to a wedding out of town, but I went to this one, and a good young couple that I really thought a lot of. And so I'm at another church. I'm just a guest. I didn't perform the wedding. I just kind of hung out. And I never saw so much leg in my life. And the girls there, mini skirts were long compared to what they wore. And I just was shocked at this church, at the leg show going on everywhere. And I looked at my feet more in that church than I ever have in my life. I was embarrassed for the church. I was embarrassed for the pastor that was too much of a coward to teach the women to dress modestly, with shamefacedness. He says there in verse 9, to teach the women to adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, and not this brazen, showy, outward, sensuous look. And then he goes on and says, let the women learn in silence with all subjection. I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man. Now over in Titus chapter 3, verse 3, 4, 5, somewhere, and he says that the older women are to teach the younger women. Women are to be teachers of women and children, but women are not to be teachers of men. Whoever's at the front of the room teaching is the authority. And right here, Paul says to Timothy, you want to have that church right. Number one, you be the one to determine who teaches and what they teach. And then number 2, 3, whatever you want to order these, you get these men praying. And then next, you get the ladies to dress modestly, and you keep them from being the authority over the men. Now, that's very unpopular preaching these days, but that's what Paul said gave us a good, solid church. You want a great church. You need great people of men and women of all ages, but you've got to have a pastor. And we're in a day of rebellion where people don't like a pastor. They don't like the idea of this guy is in charge. Every organization, Elon Musk's in charge of his whatever it is, Musk Enterprises, whatever. President Trump right now is in charge in Washington. And Gavin Newsom is in charge in Sacramento. I think. I don't know. I'm not sure what Gavin Newsom does, but he's a knucklehead. But so we need somebody to be in charge, and then we need men to pray, men to humble themselves and to seek God's face, and then we need ladies to dress modestly and appropriately and to walk in submission and not putting themselves up. Now, those are the things right there. That is the basis of great churches. And the reason America's in trouble, one of the reasons America's in trouble, one of the reasons is because we're not reading our Bible. But if we were reading our Bible, these are the things God would say, this is what helps establish great churches. This is the groundwork of great churches. And let's don't forget our role. Let's don't forget our position, who we are, what we are. Men, humble yourself before God in prayer. Ladies, dress careful. You can't keep men thinking right when women are walking by and showing everything imaginable and indiscreetly dressed and too low cut and showing. Look, ladies are too pretty. They're too attractive to dress that way. And God leads Paul to write to Timothy, if you're going to have a good church, get a man who will be in charge of who teaches and what they teach. Then you get these men to learn to pray, and you teach the ladies to dress modestly and appropriately and carefully, and then that they would stay in submission. We need teachers, we need women in the ministry, but not authorities over men. And we get that settled. Now we're ready to build a great church. And one of the reasons our church has been so blessed is because God's helped us get this. I don't know if we have the men in prayer in order as much as we've got the ladies doing their job. We got great ladies in our church. But you can see it. You don't see a man's prayer life. I wish we had our men's prayer life as together as I think we do our ladies' discretion. But we just got to work at it. Oh, we need to work at it. God bless you. Pray for your church. You go to another church, pray for your church, pray for your pastor. And if you don't have a church that's like this, find a new church. You've got to have a good Baptist church, a soul-winning church, a separated church. But these are the foundational things that make those other things count.